your attendance. Thank you. We will be also, just to remind everyone, that we'll be emailing your attendance certificates and evaluation forms and materials later on. I also wanted to just make a few quick announcements, some upcoming events. On April 22nd, tomorrow, there's the Let's Go Hiking at Black Diamond Mines. On April 26th, there is a hybrid program on accessibility and technology training program, and that's at noon. On April 26th, also at 5:30 p.m., the women's section is having their annual scholarship fundraiser. That's an in-person meeting. On the 28th, there's a Zoom webinar, which will be for fast case training, and that's at noon. May 1st at noon, there is a webinar. It's Law Day 2023, Cornerstones of Democracy with Congressman Marc Desaulniers. And then 2 more hybrid meetings coming up in May. On May 4th, the Estate Planning Symposium. That will be at 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. and both Zoom and in person. And on May 12th, there's another hybrid meeting at 11:30 to 6 p.m. and that's the solo small firm section. They're putting on a summit, Working Smarter, Not Harder. And once again, that's virtual and in person. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Ryan Lockhart. Ryan is a certified tax specialist, and he also hosts a podcast, I Know a Lawyer. Interesting. He graduated from Golden Gate University School of Law in 2010 for his JD, and then also got his master's in law, also from Golden Gate in 2014. Ryan's practice focuses on estate planning, multi-generational wealth transfer planning, business succession, estate and gift tax planning, tax controversies, tax administration, probate, and tax-free corporate reorganizations. So with no further ado, I will turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Marie. Good morning, everybody. So I don't even have to introduce myself. This is great. So we're going to talk today about one of everybody's favorite topics, property taxes. It's been a hot topic since 2020, and we'll talk about an update on what's going on with 1031's this year. And I know some people have panicked a little bit recently in the last couple of years with what our government's trying to do with 1031's, but we'll just touch upon that. But if you have any questions anytime, go ahead and raise them. I'm happy to stop and we can go through it. I know we have people online who might have some questions too. Anyways, let's get started. So obviously this is not tax advice. So if you need tax advice, whether it's any of these topics or anything else, go hire a lawyer. Don't take what I'm saying today and say, well, Ryan said it in that one presentation and I have the, PowerPoint to prove it. No, this isn't tax advice. So
this is real estate advice though, right?
Yeah, we can go with real estate advice.
Okay.
Absolutely. All right, it's Proposition 19. Proposition 19. Some people called it like bait and switch. It definitely seemed like people did not know that there were 2 parts to Prop 19 when it was on the ballot in 2020, and it caught some people off guard. I labeled it the good part and the bad part. It significantly changed property tax laws as far as the good part is just an expansion. We'll go through that, but the bad part is really about parent-child. That's the part that changed the most. So the good part was that it expanded, before the old law was, if you're 55 or older, you can move your primary residence property tax basis from one county to some counties, right? It's going to expand that to include disabled people, victims of natural disasters and wildfires. So, but it did severely limit the parent-child tax exclusion. We'll talk a little bit about that too. So tonight, we're going to talk about the background of Prop 19 a little bit. How to qualify for Prop 19 now for the transfer of parent and child for the primary residence.
Hi, this is Jim.
Let's look at a workaround. One of the big workarounds that we are employing now is using entities to transfer real estate to different generations of family, potentially. It's not a total solution, maybe or maybe not. We'll talk about that. So let's talk about the good part. Here's the good part. It passed by the ballot initiative in the 2020 election. This is the part that was advertised. All those commercials you saw was about this part. They didn't talk about the parent-child part. I was watching those commercials like, they don't know what's coming. Like I said, so it had 2 effective dates. This Prop 19 had 2 effective dates. The good part was April of 2021. And what it says is it expanded that class of people who could transfer your primary residence tax basis, factor base your value is what it's called, to a different county. And it also included that you can now transfer anywhere within the state. The prior law was that there was about 10 counties that you could go to. Now it's statewide. So if you're over 55 or you fall in the other classes, you can sell your primary residence, move to a different part of the state, and your property tax bill moves with you. It does not go up, unless you buy it. We won't go too much details, but you can purchase a property of greater value. So if it's a greater value, you're going to have a blended tax rate. You're going to still port over your existing one, and then the amount of the new property that's in excess of that will be added as your part of your property tax bill. I'm going to give you some resources about where to find some really good examples and explanations on Prop 19 if you want to go in depth. I have a different presentation where we go in depth on that. Today, we're just going to talk about what are some workarounds really about Prop 19. Also, a change that you used to be able to do it one time, right? Do that one-time transfer. Now you can do it 3 times. And I have seen, there's examples out there of couples who do it and then get divorced. The individuals still get to do it like 2 more times, right? It's personal to the person. Correct. And then you're going to file a form with the county that you go to, and that county is the one that will process it. So this is the good part. This is the part people voted for. What are the bad part? What's when it changed the parent-child? And this one took effect earlier on February 16th, 2021. Anybody here experienced the panic of January 2021? I think I was fielding about 10 calls a day just on this right here. Everybody wanted to transfer their property. Yeah?
We did my mom's house in LA County.
Yep.
They finally fixed it because they were so backed up with the process in September of last year.
I experienced that too with certain counties. They had such a backlog on this. It took them a really long time to process it through. And I kept having to tell the clients, like, panicking, like, we haven't got anything. Like, you have to be patient. This is county government at work. So, yeah, that was a crazy January. It substantially limited the parent-child transfers. So it sounds like most people here understand what the old law was, what Prop 58, parent-child. Parents used to be able to transfer their primary residence to their kids with no limit, no limitation. And then they had an additional $1 million of tax basis and other property they could transfer. That's where I did the most of my transfers in my practice. Parents with commercial buildings, rentals, all that stuff, we used to be able to transfer that as well. But now we don't. We only get to transfer the primary residence under Prop 19. So it says it requires a child to use there's a couple different requirements. One obviously has to be a parent-child transfer. And the child's gonna have to make that residence their own residence within a year of the transfer. And it's at least one child. So if you transfer to multiple children, at least one of them has to do this. And they put a cap on the limitation. So before it used to be unlimited for the primary residence, now there's a cap. You're gonna look at the parents' factor base year value, which is basically their property tax basis. You're gonna get to add 1 million, now it's 22,600 because it's indexed to inflation, so this is the number for this year. So parents have a house that they've known for 50 years, and their property tax basis is $50,000. They can transfer that property to their kid, and they can use basically 1.72 million of value, exclusion, I should say. But if that property is worth 1.5 million when they transfer it, there's going to be a reassessment on the difference. So this is also, I don't think people understood this limitation when they were voting for it as well, because probably most parts of the state, this is fine. But obviously around here, it's going to catch a lot of people. All right, so how do we qualify for this specifically? Well, again, like I said, it has to be a transfer between parent to child. It doesn't have to be direct to the child. It can. You can also use trust. I use trust for this as well. When it comes to trust in property taxes, it will look through to see who the beneficial owner of a trust is. So if the child is a beneficiary of that trust, it'll still qualify. And it must, like I said, you can't use entity interest for Proposition 19. This is the same as it was under Prop 58. You had to be a direct ownership interest in the property itself. So I'll talk about entities in a little bit, but for Prop 19, it carried over from Prop 58, you still had to be a direct ownership in the interest itself, real property interest. At least one child must make it their primary residence within 1 year. So this has been a sticking point. So talk about frustrations with Prop 19. This has been a frustration for some clients since it first came in. And they're like, well, we transferred from our parents to our children. We had 2 children, we transferred the residence. What do we do now? How do we qualify this? Well, one of them children is gonna have to make that their primary residence within a year. Well, we have our own houses. We do. So it gets a little tricky, but this is being tracked by claiming the homeowner's exemption. You know, when you buy a new property and the county assessor's office sends out that, almost like a postcard, you want to claim the homeowner's exemption, which saves you like, what, $70 on your property taxes or something like that. That's how the counties are tracking this. So although I'm not telling people that, well, I'm just telling them this is how it works. If they want to make that claim on their own, that's on them. So I may or may not have heard of some people doing this. You may have heard maybe daughter claiming it and her husband's claiming it on their other house. I don't know. So but it's going to be interesting to see how the counties kind of respond to this. I think they're still catching up, like to your point, they're still really kind of catching up to this. And there hasn't really been any cases that have come down yet, or the counties trying to challenge this key point. They're just, I think, kind of waiting and seeing and like letting people probably just go with it. But we'll see. This also kind of leads into, is Prop 19 going to stick around, which I'm going to talk about in the future here in a little bit, because maybe, maybe not. But again, we have that big cap on the exclusion, and again, this is catching some people off guard as well. So this is how we can qualify for Prop 19 as it is now, right? Where parents are going to transfer their primary residence in life or on death. At least one child is going to live in the home or make it their primary residence. And we have a cap. Hopefully we're under that cap. If not, we'll have a little bit of a reassessment maybe. And then we can satisfy the Prop 19. How do you, go ahead, Christine.
You said that cap is 1.72 and I missed how you got to it.
It's 1.0. My example had a $50,000 tax basis originally. So this is the number for today, 1,022,600. Yes.
So it says that it must be between parent to child or children. Does that apply to grandchildren, or does it have to be directly to the children?
Directly to the children, good question. So the parent to grandchild exemption, which is a different one, is still in place as it was. The only time that qualifies is if the parent of the grandchild is deceased. That middle generation has to be deceased for you to get a parent-grandchild exemption. You can't just have a child like wave out of that or anything. It doesn't work. File the Prop 19 form. So it's actually called a Prop 19 form. You file the Prop 19 form in the county where the property is located. And that's how you're telling the assessor, we did this parent-child transfer. It's very similar to the Prop 58 form. It asks for the parent's information, asks for the child's information, and information about the property. Pretty simple to file. Same time frames as the Prop 58 form. You have to file this form, I think it's within 3 years. Although remember, the child has to move in within a year. So there's it's a kind of track. All right, if you have questions about how Prop 19 works, there's a lot of different examples, either in the Taxpayer Rights Advocate Office. You go to that website, you're all gonna get the slideshow. They have information sheets that are actually really well done. And they have a lot of examples. Because there's examples of dealing with farmland, because there's specific rules really about farmland. All these different types of transfers between parent and child, like using numbers. So you can kind of see how it can get a little complicated, but if you work through the examples, I think most people can understand it. Most of those examples came from a document that the state put out, a letter to the assessors, that one that was done in 2021. That was the one we were all waiting for, to say, how is the state going to interpret Prop 19? So that's a pretty lengthy document, and it has, again, all those same examples for the most part, and it talks about how they're going to treat it. Because there was a big question we had prior to this being issued about whether the state was going to, how they're going to treat that $1 million cap, and specifically, did it have to be all the children living in the same home? or just one? Does it seem weird if it was going to be all the children? That's never going to happen probably. So they were actually reasonable in their interpretations, which was kind of a breath of fresh air. So again, if you go to that website, either one of them, you're going to have a lot of information on how Prop 19, but they're kind of nuts and bolts in those really specific examples. Any questions so far? All right. So what can we do to mitigate the impact of this Prop 19? We're not touching the good part. We like the good part. We're going to leave the good part in place. Let's really talk about parent-child transfers, right? What can we do? Well, there's not a lot we can do. Mostly it deals with using legal entities. Because we're dealing with property, it's going to be recommended that we use LLCs. Because corporations have some tax problems. And you have property inside of them and you're trying to get it out maybe in the future. That's why LLCs give us the best flexibility as far as moving assets in and out of an LLC without triggering a tax event. I don't consider it a total solution, but there is a way it might be, it's just more risky. And we're going to talk about that too. Or you can just do nothing. We could do nothing and we could wait to see if there's going to be a legislative change. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming as far as maybe a new ballot initiative or two on Prop 19 in 2024. There is some movements. So we'll see. But anyways, let's talk about the entities. There is a whole different set of rules for property tax reassessment when it comes to legal entities. And I'll give you a citation down there about if you go to the BOE's website, at that link, there's a legal entity ownership program. Very good information again. BOE's actually got pretty good information on the website. It's kind of surprising. But very good information on how this works. There's two main rules we have to look at. One, I'll call the change in control rule, and the other one's called change in ownership rule. So you have a legal entity, and it has real estate property inside of it. And this is talking about changing of the members of that entity or the owners of that entity. And so if we have a member, shareholder, partner, whatever the entity is, if they gain more than a 50% control of that entity, they're now in control. That's considered a change in control at the entity itself, which will trigger reassessment on all property owned by the entity. So this one's a big one. So this is why sometimes you don't want to have somebody gain that 51%. There may be some other reasons to do it, but just as long as you understand what's coming with the property taxes, you're holding property. Yes.
And I assume that's even if it's steps, so if somebody steps from 49 to 51, as soon as they take that extra 2%.
Correct. There's a way that the law looks at it is you have a controlling interest in that entity. You can decide what's going to happen with the property. Therefore, you should be considered the owner of that property. And therefore, that's a trigger to reassessment. So this one's a little bit easy. This one, I think most people understand, and they know this one. It's the second rule that not everybody, I haven't seen a lot of people that really know about it, quite frankly. And it's I call it the change in ownership. When you put a property you contribute as a capital contribution property to an LLC. You are going to be, the assessor is going to track that separately. You're going to be deemed an original co-owner of that property. And so if you have transferred more than 50% of your membership interest in that LLC, specifically about that property, that will trigger a reassessment on that property, not the whole thing. Because you can transfer, I can have parents form an LLC, put property in, they're 100% members of the LLC, transfer 50% away, right? Now we have kids involved in the LLC, and then later on they transfer maybe to like grandkids. It can still trigger reassessment on that property because they transferred more than 50% of that, let's just say that property. So this is a rule you still have to be mindful of. It's not as big of a hit as reassessing all properties in the LLC, but it still defeats probably the purpose of making those transfers anyways. At some point, you're gonna get hit with this, especially if death occurs, and then usually somebody's gonna get either somebody's gonna get that trigger one of these two rules on death because we just lost, somebody who was an owner. Yes.
If you put the property in the LLC when you originally take title, and you don't have the original owner.
That's exactly right.
So you could transfer to anybody as long as nobody goes over 50% at any time. So one solution is to always take title in an LLC. Even if you have a big expensive house, probably it's not worth it for a normal house. So if you have a $5 million house, probably you should take title in an LLC if you wanted to use the strategy, because then you could give pieces like to two spouses, 50% each, and there'd be no reassessment.
Correct. So I'm just going to repeat what you said in case I didn't hear it online. If the LLC itself acquires the property directly, the second rule is no longer in play because we didn't have somebody contributing the property to the LLC. It's the LLC acquired it directly. We still have the change of control rule we have to look at. But you're right. That means we can start transferring interest in that LLC. And as long as somebody doesn't cross that 50% control threshold, then we're not hitting reassessments. So if there's a lot of parties at play.
Rule that applies to the person that have the same exact ownership, you go from the individual to the LLC.
So that's okay. So that's a different one. So
But that's the first step you have to have.
absolutely. I didn't talk about that, but I will. That's a good point. So that's called the pro rata contribution, right?
Yeah.
You have an LLC, you contribute the property in, your interest in the property and your interest in the LLC have to match to be able to have a transfer tax exclusion. That's a transfer tax exclusion.
And also no reassessment.
Yeah, there will be no reassessment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just thinking 50% of people get divorced, since this is a disregarded entity, if they get divorced and one person then takes full control of the LLC, is it still excluded?
There's various exclusion out there. We still have the married people exclusion. So, sorry.
Incidental,
They
the
can
incidental
transfer
divorce.
it 3 years with a.
Correct. If it's incident to a divorce, it still qualifies for that exclusion.
Okay, I didn't know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
It
the
does.
entity.
You don't have to like time it, like, you gotta transfer before you divorce. No, they'll let you have that happen out of the divorce, like Brink said, within 3 years.
I think it's 3 years.
Because they count that divorces sometimes take long. Yes.
Going back to a previous question of mine. So using LLC, could you do the grandparent to grandchild, or grandparent or parent to child, and then grandparent to grandchild if the grandchild is over 18?
So when you're using legal entities, those rules don't matter. You can transfer to anybody you want. So if mom and dad or grandma, grandpa form an LLC, put a family legacy property, and I deal with this quite a bit. This property's gonna stay in the family. It's the Tahoe house that they've had for 50 years. They can transfer that to grandkids, their kids, anybody, as long as you don't cross one of these two rules. And remember I said it's not really a total solution, right? Because we're only getting out 50%. Well, 50% is better than nothing, but if you really want to transfer that property maybe to somebody else, what can you do if past 50? Well, let me get that in a second. I just want to say these rules are very technical. So it takes, make sure you're doing the analysis of both these rules when you're doing this before you propose it to any clients, because I want, you do the transfers, you're not gonna be able to unwind it and tell the assessor, oopsie, we're trying to fix it. Not all assessors are really amenable to that. Some counties are better than others. Yeah, I have my own opinions on which counties, but maybe you do too. Okay, so anyways, here's the steps to do it. I'm gonna give you a quick example of which I've kind of almost touched on. I'm just gonna give you a simple example that I do quite often. Parents form an LLC. Parents are 100% members of that LLC. Parents have the property they contributed, that's their capital contribution. We use the pro rata exemption, so we don't have a transfer tax when they deed it into the LLC. And now parents are 100% members of the LLC that has this property. Then they have, let's say, 2 kids, and they're going to transfer up the 50%, 25 to each of them. So now we have, if you're tracking this, we have nobody who's crossed the 50% control threshold, and they have gifted 50% of their original co-ownership interests on the second rule. So we're still good there. Now they can sit tight right there and just say, well, this is what we did. We're gonna file a gift tax return. We're just gonna keep it here and maybe wait for that legislative change. Maybe they do that. Or if they wanna be a little bit more, take on a little bit more risk, their risk tolerance is higher, then they can embark on, I'll just call it kind of like the series of LLCs that we're going to form and dissolve. And this is, I'll talk about that. So let's say after the transfer, they dissolve the LLC. Property comes out of the dissolved LLC to 50% mom and dad, 25% child 1, 25% child 2. It's still a pro rata transfer out, so we don't have transfer tax on that one. There's no income tax because LLCs tax as partnerships. You get to drop the property out pro rata without incurring an income tax hit. This is why corporations, you can't do that. But so everybody's got their proportionate interest, and then if they let this go for a little bit of time, let that season, then maybe they form a new LLC. Everybody contributes the property into LLC 2, parents gift 50% of LLC 2 away. So we're whittling down mom and dad's interest in this property. And maybe they go down the road to do this again with LLC 3. I do know some people who are doing this. There's no bright line answer on whether you can do this or not, because you have to look at step transaction doctrine. Anybody heard of the step transaction doctrine?
No.
And no, there. It's a tax concept. Basically, if you are doing a series of steps to avoid tax, the taxing authority can employ this doctrine to say, the only reason you did this was to get an end result that you avoided the tax. We're going to collapse it all down into one transaction. Boom, here's your reassessment. And the assessors will throw this term out pretty easily. Yeah. Anyways, it's not like it's easy for them to win on a step. You know, it's a facts and circumstances test. It really is. So, yeah. I mean, it's not like it's an automatic slam dunk either way, but you just need to look at it. So I just want to give you what this comes from case law. And it just says it's a series of transactions designed and executed as parts of a unitary plan to achieve an intended result. And it will be viewed as a whole, regardless of whether the effect of doing so is an imposition of or relief from taxation. I mean, same thing I basically said, just more legal words, right, from the judge. So it's all about risk tolerance when it comes to this. And I have had these conversations with clients who are like, hey, we could do this because they read it online somewhere. There's a lot of stuff about taxes people read online and they come and ask these questions. I'm sure Christina gets this too. You're like, yeah, it's not really how it is. So as long as you work this through with the clients, maybe it's a good solution. And again, if you're going to do this, you're going to need to do this over time. Because if you do this bang, 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 it's probably pretty easy to show that it was designed to, just avoid tax. If you have other reasons for doing some of these transfers or transactions, like dissolution of LLCs, that's good. It's all, like I said, it's facts and circumstances. So I just want you to understand that this is out there, and it's one of the biggest weapons a tax authority has to try to attack various transactions. This is kind of the big one for them. Yes.
When transferring, so you put in one LLC, then the parents own 50%, the children own 25 and 25. If they do another LLC, can the parents completely get rid of the 50%, or can they only give away 25%?
It would be 50% of their new interest, so it's
Okay.
50% of 50%,
Okay.
25%, like you just said.
So there's no technical way to get it completely over to the children?
You can get it, and if you did enough of these in a row over time, you can get it down to a really small number that parents still have. But again, there's costs involved in doing this, obviously. There's risk that you have to take on. And this is all about property taxes, right? There's no income tax problems with doing these kind of, putting the property in LLC, gifting it. There's a gift tax, but we're covering that with gift tax exemption if we're doing gifts. And yes,
Does it make a difference if the members and managers of the LLC are trustees of a trust, and then there's a successor trustee upon the death of the trustee? So the successor trustee, it steps in, and in essence, it's a commercial piece of property, they know about this assessment issue, and what they do is they just, give out the cash to beneficiaries of the trust. Will that work? Will that trigger the?
it will not. So trustees changing on a trust doesn't impact this property tax question at all. Remember, they look through to who the beneficial owners of a trust are, so they'll look to the beneficiaries. So if the trust changes beneficiaries, it could trigger potential reassessment. Now, there's a whole big question of how does the county even know about this stuff? Again, this is not legal advice. I'm just telling you what I hear is out there. I do hear of people crossing the 50% control threshold, and it's actually on the taxpayer, the LLC or corporation, to send a form, a change of ownership form to the county, or actually probably the BOE too. And is everybody doing that? Probably not. So there's really no mechanism for the county to kind of find this out. The biggest way they find it out is that if let's say we have an LLC that has 20 members, and there's been transfers between them, there's been some buyouts that have happened, and now somebody did have that 51%, but they didn't send that form in, but then they sell the property, and they deed it out of the LLC, the county can catch it then, because they're gonna say, wait a minute, if you dissolve that LLC we're gonna see that those percentages don't match what happened 20 years ago when you put the property in. And then they'll start digging. If they dig and they find out when that transfer happened, they will reassess it back to that date. They will assess back taxes. They will assess penalties and interest. So that's when you start negotiating. Negotiating for a number. So yes.
And all clients mail them. It's just sometimes the post office loses.
Exactly. Right? I know. I mailed it. The mail is not as good as it used to be, right? The reliability is much worse. All right, what's the future of Prop 19? I know of at least 2 movements to get ballot initiatives on the 2024 election. One of them was almost on the election last year. The Howard Jarvis Association, Taxpayers Association, whatever it's called. They just didn't get quite the signatures in time. They are renewing their effort to get it onto the 2024 election. So that's initiative 1. They want a complete reversal on Prop 19 as far as parent-child exemption. They want to go back to what Prop 58 was as far as parent-child, which would be great for people like me and for a lot of clients, because then they can start transferring those other properties, something other than a primary residence. Yes.
We have a comment. BOE can find out the percentage changes from the LLC's filed K1 form submitted to the franchise tax board.
That's true. I haven't really heard of that happening that much. Maybe they have. That's an aggressive assessor who's looking for that stuff.
If in fact initiative 1 gets passed, can the trans come down from children back to parents?
I mean, you can, but you have to have everybody willingly to participate. So if mom and dad gifted that property to their children and say, hey, I want it back, because this just came back. And remember, under Prop 58, it was a 2-way street. It was parent to child, but also child to parent. So yes, you can unwind it. Now, if you use gift tax exemption in 2021, that's done, it's gone. You can't get that back. But if you want to get at least the ownership back and the children are willing to participate in that, yes, you can unwind it. There will be a gift from children to parents, though, that you'll have to probably use exemption from the children. So, yes.
Probably is the step up in basis to
Yeah, that's probably why people would want to do it. So step up in tax basis, we'll go through it. So it's a very simple concept of, there's one really good tax benefit of dying. And it says that if whatever's in your estate, it's to step up in tax basis. So when it comes to gifting of property, and this is the main talking point I have with clients in January of 2021. Probably 80% of people I talk to ultimately decided not to do it, because when you gift property away, and then you're gifting away the same tax basis you have in that property. So if mom and dad have a very low tax basis in the property and they gift it to the kids, well, the kids have that same low tax basis. So if the kids end up selling it, they're going to pay a pretty substantial capital gain tax. Instead, mom and dad own the property when they die, and then it transfers to the kids as inheritance. We get the step up in tax basis. So it's a what do we want to save on property taxes or income taxes in the future? And I did an analysis where it basically several clients, potential clients, it would take about 20, 25 years for that to kind of net out the same saving of the property taxes.
Or the kids buy it from the parent and do a private annuity that's renewable on death of the parent.
Well, now you're getting into real advanced estate planning stuff. I do want to touch on initiative 2. It just simply says, hey, that $1 million cap on the primary residence is too low, let's bump it to 2.5. That's it. That's all that initiative does. And you know how, I'm sure we all know, when there's somewhat competing initiatives on the same ballot, it's a little wonky with California voters because they don't really understand them anyway. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe a third initiative that shows up. So we'll see. I think there's plenty of time for them to get this on. I know the signature effort is going on right now. I think they need like 900,000 signatures or something like that to get it on. But we'll see. So I do have some clients who are sitting tight, waiting to see what happens in 2024. There's some other deadlines that are kind of hitting not too long after that, especially if you're talking about gifting, inter-family gifting, especially with higher net worth folks. The estate tax, so I deal with estate tax. That's another political hot topic, estate tax. That exemption is going to be, if nothing happens by Congress, that exemption is going to sunset at the end of 2025. So it's like sometimes we're kind of seeing what's going to happen in 2024 election, and then maybe in 2025 we have to pull some triggers. We'll see. So it could be a busy year. Find out. All right. How am I doing on time?
You have 30 minutes.
How much?
About 20.
Good. I want to leave some time for questions too. So that was Prop 19. If you have any questions on Prop 19, obviously we can go come back to it. But let's talk a little bit about 1031s here in 2023. Just a brief background on 1031. I'm sure all of you probably know what it is, but it's basically a swap of investment property, right? You sell an investment property, you do a 1031 tax deferred exchange. It's not a tax-free exchange, it's tax deferred into a new replacement property that's also investment property. You can defer those taxes until you ultimately do a taxable sale in the future, and then you finally pay the government your capital gains tax. Several requirements of this, and some of these are a little ornery. Has to be a like-kind investment property. That's actually a little bit broader than probably people realize. You can go from residential to commercial or back and forth. But again, if you're going to do a 1031 exchange, there should be using, I would recommend, an exchange accommodator who will walk you through this process. And there's several good ones out there. The replacement property has to be for at least the same value of the one you sold or higher. If you don't go the same or higher, then you're going to have boot, and boot is taxable. So sometimes you get boot, you have to pay some tax, but most people try to go same or higher if they can. You have to invest all the proceeds from the sale, otherwise you get the boot. Must be the same title holder. So I've had this problem sometimes where people sold a property, then they want to do some corporate reorganization, and in the meantime, before they get the replacement property, that's going to be a problem. Just finish the exchange and then do what you're going to do as far as changing ownership or reorganizing, whatever it's going to be. You must identify the property within 45 days. This is the rule that people hate. I hate it too, because it's really quick. Really, really quick. And there's some rules, sub-rules about how you identify that, how much you can identify. So again, talk to an exchange account. And you must close on the new property within 6 months. That's your basic rules for 1031 exchanges. Very popular tool. It's been around for a long time. And does the government like 1031 exchanges? Well, we know the IRS does not. They would love to get rid of it. And apparently Biden doesn't really like it either. I don't know if he actually really does or not, but as far as policy choices he puts out there, that, and this is a quote, he called it a sweetheart deal for real estate investors, and he sought to close the loophole. Love the word loophole. Congress specifically put something in, that's a loophole, I guess. And he wanted to do it, he would love to eliminate 1031s entirely if he could. He obviously knows that that's probably not going to happen. So then his budget proposal for 2024 said, oh, fine, I'm not going to get elimination. You probably knew you wouldn't get this either. I'm going to put a cap. I want to throw a cap in there. $500,000 aggregate annually for a single taxpayer, $1 million for America. Those numbers are kind of small when you talk about 1031s, especially for larger real estate investors, right? Is this just throwing it out there to try to please some constituents and just make some political points? I don't know. Maybe they actually do this, maybe they pull the trigger on it. We know that they don't have full control of Congress anyways right now, so it just seems like it's very political as far as just throwing things out there and seeing how people react. This isn't happening right now. So actually really nothing's happening with 1031s right now, right? It's still the same as it is. The laws are not changing as far as we know. These are just proposals and ideas that get thrown out. But it causes a little bit of panic in the real estate world. And the one thing that I think is very positive is so he talked about this in 2023 and again in this 2024 budget proposal. There's been a pretty large response from the real estate world, including the lobby groups, including large investor groups. Yeah, it's been, so they've like hit Washington and said, can't do this. It's going to be a negative impact on the economy, negative impact on a lot of different places. So I think that's good because if they actually really do try to push this through legitimately, or again, we're back to the 2024 election, see what happens there. Then I think that there's enough money and lobbying back against it that it might be a third rail topic. We'll see. Yeah.
I do have a 1031 controversy case at the federal level, but most of them are FTB and OTA. We went to a 1031 conference, and California and New York are like the only states where they challenge these like all the time. The rest of the states are like, oh, it's fine.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard that too, that the federal government really isn't totally interested in going after them too much unless it's like a really egregious case. You're right. It's the state and local governments who are really going after it. California's aggressive, as we know, anyway, on the tax front. Yeah,
Hey, Brian, just if you could repeat the questions, because they're really good questions for the people on the Zoom, that would be helpful, just if you speak about it.
no problem. So Christina just said that
Sorry.
it's not so much a federal government that's going after 1031 or challenging them, it's California. She said California and New York are the two highest states for it. Surprise, surprise.
Because you can 1031 like, baseball scenes, I guess, like, anyway.
She does a lot more controversy work on this, so talk to her. There was a 2021 study done by Ernst & Young that said that 1031 generated about 7.8 billion in tax revenue at the federal, state, and local levels. So there's obviously an economic question here of, well, if Biden got his way on those and put those caps in, 500,000 per individual, $1 million for a married couple, what would that look like? Well, California accounts for 35% of all exchanges in the nation in the last 10 years. So that's a pretty big number. And you can see why the franchise tax board is like, hey, we want some of that. There's other studies too that talks about that the volume would drastically reduce if there's these caps, because there's just really no incentive to try to change from one investor or invested property to a different one if you're going to be way above those cap numbers, right? At least from a tax perspective. So they think it would actually reduce that $7.8 million in taxes. It would reduce that number. It would be a worse thing for the government as far as tax revenue. And there would be a rise in alternative tax strategies, which I could just see some tax shelter strategies start popping up, right? Like they did in the 80s and stuff like that. So, and who's going to get impacted the most if there was a reduction in 1031s? State and local taxation. Those are the ones getting the most benefit out of this, because it's not just taxes that drives 1031s, it's also redevelopment of certain areas, right? So that it would impact all of us. 1031s actually only account for about 20% of commercial real estate transactions. Right? I was kind of surprised too when I read that. Did you think like, well, why wouldn't they just go into a new building? That means there's a lot of that 7.8 billion. Probably a lot of that's coming from that other 80%. So it's not as huge of a deal as people think it is, but it's still very important. And it's because it has been around for a very long time. So it's kind of strange. So what about DSTs? Everybody knows what DSTs are? Delaware Statutory Trusts. They are getting much, much more popular. So what a Delaware Statutory Trust is, they give it to Delaware to get something in that the IRS blesses. They're very good at it. Is you can do an exchange from a property into a Delaware Statutory Trust, which kind of operates like a REIT a little bit. You're an investor, but you have a direct ownership interest in a portfolio of properties. They're going to give you a return. There's a whole discussion there of what that looks like. And that qualifies for a 1031 exchange. So I do have several clients who have owned real estate for a long time. They're literally looking to retire. They just want a return. They don't want to manage property. They don't want to do any of that. So they will exchange into a DST and basically just cash checks. Yes?
But they roll over the properties every 5 to 7 years, as I understand.
Usually it's about 7 to 10 years on average.
Yeah.
And then when you roll over that property, they'll give you the opportunity to just do another 1031 exchange into the new one if you want.
Or back out.
Or back out. Yes. Eventually you can back out and just pay some tax and be done. But if you're rolling into new DSTs and then you die, your kids inherit that DST interest with a stepped up tax basis. And that's when they will usually exit. Yes.
They track the capital gains for somebody that cashes out. They send it just like they would with any portfolio.
Correct. Yeah, there's a lot of reporting requirements for DSTs, and they're very good at tracking that and reporting it. Because they are, like I said, they're one of the blessed mechanisms. And they are gaining in popularity quite a bit. There's more and more DSTs being offered, and there's more and more people taking up DSTs because they're getting good returns. And one thing is you can go to a DST that diversifies your investment into different sectors. And there's various offerings that are going to be different sectors. So it's really diverse on what you can invest in. You can be more risky if you want. You can just be safe. It's pretty amazing what they got, all these companies have put together. There's only about 6 big DST companies in this country that do most of the business. There's some others that are popping up now, but DST has been around for a little while too, 30, 40 years, I think. So, yes.
Can you reinvest part in a new upland property and the balance in a DST, and what kind of benefit does that give you, or is there a drawback?
Good question. Yes, you don't have to roll everything into a DST. You can just do a portion. So maybe you wanted to diversify some portion of your gain into a DST because that's going to be invested in a portfolio of properties. But you want to still buy maybe an investment property that you're going to manage yourself. So yeah, you can have a blended approach there as well. Very flexible. Very flexible. All right. So what's on the horizon with 1031s? I would assume we're going to keep getting every year some comment from our government saying, hey, we should probably get rid of 1031s, right? And everybody says no, and then they go away. But I think the language that they use is pretty instructive. So when they say loophole, I think that's kind of a political play there a little bit to try to get an emotional response, maybe from some part of the taxpayer base. Because it's clearly not a loophole when it's very explicitly that's what they wanted you to do. Loopholes in my mind as far as taxes are concerned is, hey, we thought it was going to be this, but we didn't think of this other thing, and now people are exploiting that. That's more of a loophole in my mind. So I think that there's just more talk right now than anything else. I would expect an even stronger fight from the real estate professional community and investors to kind of put this to bed, that, hey, 1031s are here to stay, stop talking about it. I'm going to be surprised to see that. More and more money, like I said, is flowing in. And the good news is the lobby is super strong, so don't panic when you hear about it. I would only panic if Congress actually votes on it. And then, of course, maybe it gets challenged, we'll see, but it didn't get that far. I think it's more likely that instead of attacking 1031s directly, they go after the capital gains rates. That's what I think it's more likely. Because that applies, that's a whole different policy choice, right? It's just tax rates in general. So I wouldn't be surprised if, and there has been talk about, Biden when he was getting elected was trying to bump capital gains up. He didn't get it, but I wouldn't be surprised in the next 10, 20 years, there's still that conversation of bumping capital gains rates up. So that's why they can increase revenue, not just on real estate, but some other investments too. So it's just different ways for them to go about trying to capture that revenue that they're looking to capture. So any questions so far? That's what I got for you today. Go ahead.
The DST, comply with identify the property and the rules of the 1031.
So again, that 45 days is quick, right? So hopefully you're working with an exchange accommodator, and then you say, I'm going to do a DST. You get the DST company in quickly, and they will do that identification with you. And they actually go through and say, here's our different offerings, and we're going to identify the properties in each one as your identification.
Could you do that just with a REIT?
Yeah, like I said, they're similar to REITs.
Does it work to then 1031 into a REIT and the same thing, identifying properties in the REIT, or?
Yeah, as long as you identify actual properties, yes. And there's UPREITs too, so there's a lot of different versions of those out there. 1031 or DSTs are more hands-off. I put my money in, you send me checks. So it's just easier, I think, for people to understand the DSTs. And sometimes REITs, I know they're very similar too. So anyways, this is my team. I'm McKenna, Brink, Signorotti. You probably know some of the people on this screen. Erica McKenna, past president of Bar Association. She's a business transactional. So her and I work together a lot on real estate transactions. Dominic Signorotti, I think, is in this group, right? I think so. And then Tanner Brink. So that's us. We're in Walnut Creek. And yeah, and thank you. Any questions?
Encourage a Q&A. And 2 more minutes.
We got 10 more minutes, so let's talk some more.
And I do have from Zoom, they can't hear the questions very well, so
I'll try
we're
to
going to do the Q&A, try to repeat it.
Okay. Is there any questions on that?
Not yet.
Not yet? You're good. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, you're good? I'll just make sure there's no more questions. If anybody has a comment, Prop 19 is always fun to talk about.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
very much for getting this done. I also, for those of you who don't know, I wanted to introduce you to Sarah Marin, our new program coordinator. Sarah, and Drew Irons, our everything now.
Jack of all trades.
Yeah, and apparently involved in real estate.
You know, they're board people that like reading the tax law, and tax.
Okay, maybe.
They get bored, they start reading them.
I'm just worried about Jody.
I know, I get some like different things, it'll be off to get to the grandparents.
No problem, thanks, Mike.
Right, and I know you were coming forward, and like, you were first know.
Yeah, you'll laugh when the whole thing was coming down about the transfer basis. So the property my mom lives in LA, my grandfather put the down, my great grandfather put down from the gas. So literally, it's a $1.4 million house for everybody that pays $900 a year. Yeah, I mean, assessed value. So I was like calculating out, okay, well, if we gift it, what's it going to be? What, where's the break even for my sister and I? And I share space with some CPAs, and my buddy's also CPA.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Everybody goes, why don't you buy it, do a forgivable note that's forgivable on death? And so we ended up acquiring it basically with a private annuity that's a 20-year note
Yep,
forgivable.
I've done that, right.
Yeah, but